Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today I want to talk about shamans and probably why you've been seeing a lot of them if you've tried to play constructed Hearthstone lately. So, you guys know there's a lot of websites out there that analyze what's going on in constructed. I don't typically review them very much on one hand because I kind of know the constructed meta lower expectations in the arena meta. The constructed scene has always been dominated by aggressive, by zoo, by face decks, and it's generally, at least in my opinion, not been a very enjoyable experience, at least for long periods of time. Like, I like playing ranked mode, trying out new cards, trying out new decks, but after like an hour, after 2 hours, I just kind of get fed up of playing against an aggro deck like 7 times in a row. So, for me, it's been whatever. I mostly play constructed for the fun aspect and not so much for the competitive aspect. That's why I haven't really gone through too many of these websites in my videos, but today I'm going to change it up a little bit because there's been some very interesting statistics coming out of the constructed side of the game that I thought you guys would enjoy my take on, at least. So, generally it started with the changes that Blizzard had done to the game a few weeks back, and generally they attempted to nerf all of the powerful decks. So they nerfed a lot of the Shaman cards, particularly the ones that are not fun to play against, and they nerfed things like Yogg. They nerfed Call to Wild, now 9 mana instead of 8, and that's a pretty big deal. As I mentioned, 1 mana for a card like that just means you have like a giant tempo drop on 8, because on 8 you generally do nothing then. So Hunter's got a bit of a shaft. Tempo Warriors got a bit of a shaft too. So basically all the top decks got kind of hit a little bit, and I was pretty optimistic about these changes because I thought in general aggro decks would, kind of get pushed down a notch because, the face Shaman was kind of like the king of aggro decks. And there are a few people that disagreed with that. There's a few people that just thought Shaman would take off, but it's a bit of an interesting thing. Yesterday we had the new Tempo Storm meta snapshot, and it highlighted these classes. And if you're not familiar with their meta snapshots, basically Tier 1 is usually 3 to 5 decks. I don't think I've ever seen it ever before that Tier 1 only had 1 class on it, and it is mid-range Shaman. It is not the aggro Shaman that I so despise playing against, but it is still Shaman, and it is alone in Tier 1. It's basically like Tier 0. And, the Tempo Storm meta snapshot is generally the collective of subjective opinions. So some people, often talk about how, maybe it's not that relevant, maybe it's not actually exactly well representing the latter situation, and that's when we went to statistics from constructed. There's a website out there, vicioussyndicate.com, that does a lot of these statistics, and I actually went back and this is their statistics from the previous one. So before Blizzard changed up all the cards, these were the most powerful classes in the constructed game at the time. So there was mid-range Shaman, which apparently is still up there. There was aggro Shaman, which is right around the same power level, then mid-range Hunter and Secret Hunter. So the Hunters kind of got, pretty shafted with the Call to Wild nerf. The aggro Shaman got, a bit screwed with a lot of the very annoying and very ridiculous burst cards in the game. Mid-range Shaman, while it included those cards in most iterations, it didn't rely on them. And largely, we kind of see a lot of mid-range Shamans now because they had other options that were not as key to winning as they were in aggro Shaman. Yogg Druid obviously doesn't work anymore. Zoo Warlock I think works about as well. The warrior decks are obviously a bit down, and in general, the other decks didn't actually matter very much. Like if you're sporting a 46% average win rate, well, you're not really going anywhere if the top decks kind of drop a few points. So yeah, this is before the nerfs. So what happened after the nerfs? Now, Vicious Syndicate has not released a updated power rankings. There's no number 21 yet, but they do have the live rankings, and from those, at least from where they were this morning, we can see this giant chart here, and I'll just interpret the important aspects to it. So the important part is that mid-range Shaman does indeed have a gigantic lead over every other deck in the game right now. So this chart represents 93.3% of frequency of the decks on the ladder. So, there's like 7% of decks that are kind of like the other category that are not represented represented by this chart, but you can kind of guess that this is basically what's going on ladder right now. So mid-range Shaman has a 56% win rate, and no other deck seems to pass 51, I believe. And there's actually quite a lot of decks in the red, largely because mid-range Shaman, which has the giant lead in win rate, has, a huge occurrence compared to all the other decks, and it seems like not too many other decks can beat it. So it seems like there's a bit of verification here that the Tempo Storm meta snapshot was indeed correct, and it is indeed the case that mid-range Shaman has taken over the ladder despite Blizzard's effects to nerf, aggro Shaman primarily, but you get the idea. There's a lot of aspects that are similar between these decks, and some people are kind of upset that after Blizzard makes an effort to change the game, it turns out the game is more one-sided than ever towards Shaman again, but again, it's a different kind of Shaman that I think frustrated me at least. But let's stay objective. Let's just go over the stats a little bit. So more into these stats, we can see that the main decks that actually beat mid-range Shaman, there's actually only 3. So there's Freeze Mage, there is Aggro Mage. If you don't know what that is, you're not alone. And there's Cthulhu Priest. So those 3 decks seem to do okay against mid-range Shaman. So if you actually look at all 3 of those decks actually blow. So the main reason why mid-range Shaman is so powerful right now is because the main decks that are good against it can't really win very many other matchups. So just to simplify the chart, I just have the deck with the overall win rate here so you can kind of more clearly see the situation, what I'm talking about here. So it's actually pretty insane. The bad side of all of this is that 56% average win rate with a deck basically means that if you play mid-range Shaman enough this season, you will get Legend. You can get Legend with 56% win rate. Actually, it's not even that hard. So if you are an average Hearthstone player, if you pick up mid-range Shaman right now, you will probably get Legend in, several dozen hours of ladder play. And I don't recommend that. I think you will probably not enjoy playing the game too much if you play that many hours of one deck, but that's just me. And some people do find differences in that. So the main outrage, again, is that mid-range Shaman is so insane and most of the other decks just cannot win against it. So is this bad for the game? Yes and no. And this is where I want to give you guys my opinion. So the part that's bad is, yes, it's kind of bad that one deck is like super dominant and nothing can beat it and all that. And we've seen that in the past with like Grim Patron Warrior, with like Miracle Rogue, with a few other decks from time to time. We have seen some really dominant decks in the past. This is not new, but it does seem to be that mid-range Shaman is very much the best deck, as opposed to before where, the best deck, maybe there were like 2 really good decks, or maybe 3 really good decks. But it does seem like it's just one really good deck right now. So has Blizzard failed the balancing patch? Kind of, more or less. There's just going to be a lot of mid-range Shamans out there, and people who want to play to win but don't want to play mid-range Shaman or are sick of playing against mid-range Shamans are going to have a bit of a frustrating experience. In terms of the tournament side of things, I don't think that'll be too affected. You can just ban mid-range Shaman, and yes, if you ban mid-range Shaman, that kind of means that you're weak to other decks like mid-range Shaman. So there's a bit of an issue there, but again, it's kind of like dropped down a notch. I don't think the current state of Hearthstone will be, negatively represented in the tournament scene. And with the BlizzCon Championship coming up next month, that is a factor that I think some of you guys might be thinking about. Now, the part that I really want to get to here is, how bad does this affect on the game? And did Blizzard actually make the game overall worse by changing the cards that they did, a week and a half, 2 weeks ago? And my answer to that, the short answer, is no. I think they actually did make the game better. And this is, where I guess there's going to be, my opinion, that's maybe a little bit controversial. So, in my opinion, it comes down to this. When I play against mid-range Shaman, even though I lose maybe more than I would like, I don't really have that miserable of an experience. And this is not true for aggro Shaman. When I would play aggro Shaman, when I play against Aggro Shaman, that is, I don't actually think I've ever played Aggro Shaman, but when I play against Aggro Shaman, it seemed like if they got a hand that had enough direct damage, it didn't actually matter what minions I played, what I removed, what I did, I just kind of died. And that's about it. So there's no interaction. It's I wasn't actually playing a game. You guys have seen in my past few videos where I'd have, ridiculous combos, ridiculous minions, just, pushing out, just dominating my opponent, and then 18 damage burst with, Wind Furied Weapon and all that kind of fun stuff that you guys are very familiar with. So that really sucked. And the fact that Aggro Shaman actually is terrible right now, I think, for people's level of enjoyment playing on ladder is actually a great thing. So there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of experiences that people don't like to go through when they play against certain decks on ladder, but even though mid-range Shaman just seems to be the most dominant deck ever right now, I don't think it's that big of a deal in terms of having fun. And that's because mid-range Shaman, while it's generally a deck with a lot of unfair cards, the overall experience is back and forth and actually feels like you're playing a game with decisions involved. And, that is not going to be the case when you're playing against a face deck. That is not the case when you're playing against an aggro deck. Often, if zoo decks just have minions you can't possibly ever fully remove, like we saw in, Naxxramas GVG area, that was also not too fun of a game for me. And the other aspect that I think is a relatively fun game for me, but I know most people did not enjoy, is the combo aspect. There's combo decks out there that if they, met their combo condition, and often that happened frequently enough that people didn't really like playing against combo, which is, probably the main thing that Blizzard has nerfed over the years. So yes, okay, mid-range Shaman is really, really good, too good right now, I get it, but it's not a combo deck, it's not a face deck, it's not an aggro deck, it's like maybe close to a zoo deck, but not exactly that even. So yes, it's a pretty unfair deck. If you want to do well on ladder, you should definitely be playing this deck. But, if you want to play your own creations, if you want to try a mix of different decks, the experience that you'll have playing Hearthstone, at least in my opinion, won't be all that bad. And even though, of course, there's a lot of changes I would make, there's a lot of changes that, a lot of the community people have forward that they want to see made in constructed Hearthstone, Constructed Hearthstone has never been in a great spot, and at least in terms of enjoying every individual game, I certainly think we're in a much better spot now than we were a few weeks ago before the changes. So that's kind of my take on it. In the end, I've always said this, I've always lived this. So you play a game like Hearthstone to have fun. So even if there's a deck that's more broken than ever out there, if playing against that deck, win or lose, is more enjoyable, then, Hearthstone has actually moved a step up, despite the fact that, yes, there's a lot more they could be doing, all the rest, and most likely, with this feedback, with these numbers, Blizzard would probably, hopefully, have more of a consideration for balance, more of a consideration for certain classes, certain combos, certain different aspects of the game in their next expansion, and hopefully they hit it out of the park and everything will be solved. Now, it's probably not going to happen, but with these experiences, with the fact that they're willing to make changes, and we can see the results of those changes already, there's a higher likelihood that we'll be in a better spot when Blizzard's in the position to make, giant changes as they are when expansions are released. So I'm relatively happy, all things considered, with the changes we experienced a few weeks ago, and I think with this whole experience, this overall experience, we'll be in a better spot once the next expansion is released. So that's my opinion. I know some of you guys might not agree with all of it, but let me know what you think. Let me know what you expect of the future of Hearthstone. Hope you guys have enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.